Mhm. Welcome everyone to this ArchiveSpace training. So good afternoon to those on the East Coast, good morning to those elsewhere, and whatever time you are in. Welcome to this training on basic record creation and overview of the ArchiveSpace application. I'm Brittany Newberry, the music and pop culture archivist at Georgia State University, and I'm joined today by my fellow trainer, Rachel, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Rachel Searcy, and I'm the accessioning archivist at New York University.
Okay, so in advance of this training, you should have received an email with an agenda for the training with links to all the materials you will need to participate in this workshop and to continue learning after the training is over. We may not stick exactly to the times that are listed in the agenda, but we will plan to take a break a little later on. And so included in the course materials is a quick start guide that you can use to supplement today's training. Use it to test what you have learned today by using that and by creating examples within your own ArchiveSpace instance or in the ArchiveSpace sandbox available via the ArchiveSpace website. You can access the ArchiveSpace sandbox from the ArchiveSpace Getting Started page, and it's also should be linked in your guide. There's also a training evaluation at the end of the agenda that we hope you complete at the end of this training. So we are using Zoom webinar for this training, and your microphone and camera are both muted. So if you'd like to ask questions of us trainers, we ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you have a general question or need some other form of assistance, please feel free to reach out in the chat. Some questions will be read and answered during allocated time for Q&A after each portion, or we may answer them throughout. So just be aware. So we are using the latest version of ArchiveSpace for this training, which is version 3.5.1. If you are currently using an earlier version of ArchiveSpace, keep in mind some of the features you see today may not be available to you at home. We also won't be able to troubleshoot issues with your own implementations of ArchiveSpace at your organization. So if you have a question or issues with your implementation, please email ArchiveSpace home@lyrasis.org. Also keep in mind, this workshop assumes that you have some familiarity with archival concepts. So if you don't have this necessary background, I recommend reviewing the recording, like the getting started with archives stuff on the ArchiveSpace website. So finally, please keep in mind there are many participants in this workshop coming from a variety of institutions and experience levels. Remember that the ArchiveSpace Code of Conduct applies to all ArchiveSpace events, including virtual events. So please remember to be considerate and respectful in your interactions in the Q&A and chat and with the trainers, and your fellow participants. So with that, let's get started. So we're going to start with a general overview of the staff interface, which is called the staff side. You may hear it referred to as that. We'll give a brief view of the public user interface, or the PUI. We'll get into accession records after that. And then after our break, we'll come back for resource records and a brief overview of digital object records. So this training is specifically geared on the 3 primary records that are created in ArchiveSpace. These are called the material description records. So please be aware of that. So let's first give you a functional overview. There are 4 different command zones of ArchiveSpace on the landing page. So after you've logged in, you'll be seeing this landing page. We'll start with the top right. So over here are various menus, drop-down menus that you can use. Now, what you see from these drop-down menus depend on your permission level. So the permission level in this instance that we are currently looking at is full, like system admin, but your basic users and other types of users may not see everything that's available in a drop-down. So this is the repository and application management section. And you can do things over here that will impact the whole ArchiveSpace implementation, such as if you are an institution that has multiple repositories, say you're a large university that has multiple different archives and they each need their own repository with own version of ArchiveSpace. They need to create their own records, they have their own management. You may want to have multiple repositories. So you can create that in ArchiveSpace. And from here, the select repository, you can see the abbreviations for each of those repositories and choose to go into different ones if you have those permissions. Now, if you're just an archivist in one or a basic record creator in one, you won't necessarily be able to see other repositories unless you're given permission to create records in those other repositories. There is a default repository, like everyone will be assigned a default one, the one they're mainly working in. So that's the one you are a part of, or that's the landing page for that repository. So when we logged in, we were with RC repository, but we can change to SCA in this instance. And so you can move between them and you can have multiple repositories, not just two. And you just create those and add users to them. Now the system drop down is another one of the drop downs where you won't see everything if you don't have permissions to see it. The system admins typically have all, so you can manage your controlled value list, which is usually the typical drop down list when you go into record. You can manage container profiles, location profiles. Here is where you would manage repositories, create new ones, change information about repositories like contact number, address, that kind of thing. Manage your OAI, PMH settings, as well as manage users. So create users, give them permission levels, that kind of thing. And then you get your system information, as well as from here, this is the ArchiveSpace Help Center. At the most basic level, everyone has access to click on the ArchiveSpace Help Center, but to use the ArchiveSpace Help Center, to see outside of this dropdown, you must be an ArchiveSpace member. And so if you're logged in, you can click on this and go directly into ArchiveSpace Help Center. Members get this as a member benefit, and you can use the user manual and the user tutorial videos, and you can access it from here, as well as from any of the question marks that are throughout your ArchiveSpace instance. These question marks are about the specific area that they're next to or with. So here we would go to ArchiveSpace Help Center, would help us with what's happening over here in this dropdown and such. So when you see this, I would make sure you're logged in already. Create an account if you're a member. Each member can create an account with their institution's email address. And you would click on this and it would take you into the ArchiveSpace Help Center and that aspect of the user manual to help you with those functions. And then next to this is user preferences. So if you're an admin, you have access to change preferences on global level, meaning all repositories. You change the preferences like how the browse menus look, how the what's the default and create, the record creations, that kind of thing. Repository preferences only apply to that specific repository that you're in. And again, you need to be an admin to do that. And then default repository preferences are, again, the default for that repository. If you if you're having a user that's having issues and you would like to become that user to see what's happening in their version of the ArchiveSpace instance, what's happening in that record, you can actually become that user as an admin. Just choose them and type in their password and go from there. And then you can also manage your user account from this drop down. So change your password, do all that type of stuff that you need to do from this menu drop down. And then the next area of ArchiveSpace that you need to be aware of is the gear menu. The gear menu allows you to do various things. It's a management menu. So it's to manage groups. Each permission level is a group. and each group has various permissions. And if you're an admin, you can change the various permissions for that group. So you can choose, you can choose what type of records they can create, can view, can edit. And so you do that in the groups. And then user access is what group is that user a part of. You would do that in manage user access. Manage assessment attributes applies to assessment records. We will not get into assessment records today, but it is a record that you can create, and these attributes are managed at an admin level and can be changed. And then manage top containers, that's the boxes, your physical containers that you just can describe in ArchiveSpace. You can manage those through this dropdown. You can also transfer repositories to another repository. If you're a system admin, you can actually do that. Say this repository is no more, and all the collections and records need to go to another one. That's a function that can be done in ArchiveSpace. You can also see a list of all the background jobs that have been done, all the imports and imports and reports and all that can be seen through background jobs, even PDFs that you've created. Now the bulk import template, that allows you to see all of the templates that you can use to import data into ArchiveSpace that are associated with like record creation. So we have CSVs as well as the bulk import tool for archival objects and digital objects. You're able to download the Excel file or the CSV file and use that. So you don't have to go looking for it in GitHub or anything like that. If you have version, I think 3.3 to most recent, you can see this and use it and get your import templates to use for various types of records in ArchiveSpace. And this page describes what those templates are for and how to use them, and also recommends you don't delete anything when using the template so it imports correctly. And then again, from this gear drop down, you're able to go into reports, see the out of the box report template that ArchiveSpace has, so you can do various reports that are already a part of ArchiveSpace, and then you can see and create custom report templates. And then you can see what plugins you have. Out of the box, ArchiveSpace instances all have the LCN AF import, which is importing subject headings and agent records and that from Library of Congress. So that's the out of the box plugin that everyone has. But if you were to install any other plugins through your host provider, or through if you're like self-hosted and you have plugins, you can have them appear in this drop down to see what you have. Any question on those two areas? Okay, so I don't see. There are no slides for this, that we are just using ArchiveSpace, like an instance of ArchiveSpace. So whatever is in this is typically in the sandbox, like that data, but that changes over time. So just FYI. But there will be a recording of this made available elsewhere. And will be emailed to you and put on YouTube at a certain date, but you'll get an email of the recording. And I'm sorry to everyone who's had issues with the Google Drive link. I don't know what's going on. So I'm going to move on to another area of ArchiveSpace applications. So the third area that you want to be aware of and you'll be interacting with probably the most is the create and browse dropdown. So these allow you to create records in ArchiveSpace, as well as see what records have been created in all the major record creation areas. So so in the create, you'll see all the various types of records you can create: accession, resource, digital objects, and then subjects, agents, locations, all of those. You can even create background jobs from here. So I hope you can see it, but in the create menu, there is a line between the top three and then the ones below it. That line indicates that all the material description records, accession, resource, and digital object are repository specific. When you create it in this repository, it does not appear in any other repository that you have as a part of your instance of ArchiveSpace. So they're all repository specific. And if you need them to be in another repository rather than this one, you would have to transfer them over to that other one. The ones below it, the subject, agents, location, those kind of things, those are all repositories. They're global. So if you create a subject in this repository, it can be used in another one. Same with agents and locations, because you may share locations. They may not be repository specific, so you want to be aware of that so you don't duplicate the creation of certain records like subjects, agents, and locations. There's no need for that. You should be seeing it in all repositories. And then the browse menu, it gives you ability to just click on these different record types and browse what's available to you that's been created already for these accession records. Again, it still has that line too. So you click on accessions here, you're only going to see the accessions for this repository. But if we were to change repositories, we would see different accessions. So when you have clicked on browse, you see a variety of things. You see a listing of all the repository, all the accession records in this repository. And it shows you how many, and you can sort by title, when it was created, identifier, session date. You can do a faceted sort, so it can be by title and date created, that kind of thing. You see that there are different columns. In your preferences, you can change which ones appear and which one is the default like sort. You can do that in your preferences. So this one, we have title first, we have identifier, accession date, dates, and extent. And the top, these buttons allow you to edit default values, download a CSV of all the accessions, even create another accession. If you were to select one of these, if you had this as a capability in ArchiveSpace, you could delete it from the browse list. You see that we only have 4 in here. In your preferences, you can actually determine how many are shown on a page. The default is usually like 10, I think 10 per page, depending on the type of record. So you can change in your preferences how many show up in the browse list on the first page. So you don't have to keep going through so many pages. You might just be scrolling. So on the side here, you can see that you can even filter your browse results. So you can filter by text. So say we just want corporate ones that have records in the title, you can do that. You can continue to filter by text. You can filter by date. So accession date, when was it accession, and it gives you year. And you can filter by creator. If there's so if you just want those created by Krispy Kreme donuts, you can do that and just see accessions associated with it. And if you want to get it even more filtered and add some keywords, you can do that from here. And then from the browse, you also have the ability, when you're looking at the record, you'll see that in the far right-hand column, you have what's called view and edit buttons. View buttons take you into that record, but you see the closed version of that record and you're not in edit mode. So you just see the fields that have been filled out and what's been added to those. And we'll go into how to create accession records here soon. So, and then if you click edit, you're in edit mode of that. So you see all available sub-record types, all the text that's been added, see what's required. You can start like editing this and do other things with it. So it depends on how you like to use it, but view may be great, or if you're wanting to edit, you can come here and edit it and so forth. But if you're like, I'm looking for a specific thing and you have a ton of collections or records in your repository and you're like, I can't just browse the list, I don't want to do that, I'm not sure if it's accession record or resource record I'm looking for, you may want to search. So the search capability is the fourth command zone of ArchiveSpace landing page. It's like Google. You can search by keyword and such. You can do simple basic searches, or you can do advanced searches. So if you just do a simple search and say, I think I'm looking for Krispy Kreme, I'm looking for any records associated with Krispy Kreme, you can do that and it will bring up every record that is associated with that keyword search. So you see with the accession records, oh, there's 2 resource records. There's a corporate entity, which is an agent record. It even brings up component records like archival object records. As we can see, there's 70 results and we're only getting 10. So you can also change how your search results, how many show in preferences too. So we're like, oh, I need to filter this. I just want archival objects that are to have the name Krispy Kreme in them. So we can see, okay, in the title, there's Krispy Kreme. Okay, I wanted this album. And so you can view or edit that album. And if it's a archival object, it will show you the parent resources, so the hierarchy of that. And we'll talk more about the hierarchy later. You can see that it's in Krispy Kreme Corporation records and newsletters. That may be a series or sub-series, something associated that's on that hierarchy. Let's clear that. Other than just record type, you can type in more text, so filter by text. You can choose creator. You can even choose subject headings associated with it. As you can see, a lot of subject heading, language and materials. If it's been published, the level in the finding aid, you can do that to see. So our search results, after we cleared all of that, we cleared both Krispy Kreme and archival objects. We got all possible records in ArchiveSpace that we could see. So we have over 5,000 in here, and we could just go through these if we wanted to filter text in here. Well, let's go back to search. So if you do an advanced search, you have the ability to choose one of the Boolean operators, not, so you can say it's this and not that. You can choose the search keyword, who it was created by, the creator, identifier, when it was modified, note, subject, title, that kind of thing. And then you can also say that you want it to contain this text, so you can do all of that. So that's the advanced search, and you can continue to add to it. And so when you do advanced searches, you can choose to do text advanced searches. So say and then you can choose date. So choose a date that's associated with it. You can get as granular as you want with this. I don't recommend it unless you have just tens of thousands of records and you're just not sure what you're looking for. Generally, if you just know the identifier or the title or something like that, you're going to find what you're looking for with the searching. Okay, any questions about just a functional overview of the staff interface? Okay, if not, we're gonna, let me make sure I've gone over everything I want. Yes. So let's look at the public interface and then get into accession records. So from the staff side, you can view the public interface. Now, the public interface is something that you don't have to use if you're using ArchiveSpace. It is an option given to you. So it's whenever you're in a record and you choose to publish it, it's publishing to that interface. So researchers can use it to find materials, to browse finding aids, that kind of thing. Now, this is what it looks like out of the box, no customization done whatsoever. So when you're on the public interface, this is the landing page. You can see that there's these different tabs at the top. These all are associated with the various types of records that you can create in ArchiveSpace. So if you click repositories, that's going to show you all the published repository records. As you can see, we don't have any published repository records. We're not giving people information about the repositories. in the public interface. So you can choose that. If you click on collections, you see all collections are available in all repositories. So all repositories would publish to the same public interface when you're in ArchiveSpace. If you share the same instance, if you don't want that, you would share different ArchiveSpace instances rather than having the same with multiple repositories. So that's why you can go in here and you see on the side that there's repositories. So these are all in repository 2. And you can see that this is the repository it's associated with. But again, we can't find out any information about that. Besides that, it's called the Allen Doe Research Center. And then on the side, if you're looking at collections, you see a lot of various information associated with these. You can see how to sort them, which is title, year, identifier. The public side is always going to have more user-friendly wording than the staff side, because we don't assume that our researchers know all these things that we should know as archivists and archives records creators and that kind of thing. So it's the title, year, identifier, relevance. Depending on the tab, it has a default sort that you can change, but that's in the config file and not necessarily something you can do on the staff side. So you can also filter your results. So search in here, search by date and text, search by subjects, language, agents, which are called names on this side, that kind of thing. So you can filter your text, the results based on these additional filters. And then in the results, you will see that you get name, the type of record it is, the identifier associated with it. If there's an abstract or scope and contents note, it will pull information from there to be a part of what's shown. It will also show dates and then where it's found. So if it's an archival object, it's going to say, it's going to have more found in, and I'll show you that in a moment. So if you click on digital materials, again, that's the digital objects. They're called digital materials over here. And you can see all digital materials associated with this, with your repositories. Unprocessed materials are your accession records, and subjects are subjects, names are agent records, and then record groups are, well, if you have any record group, are the classification records, which we're not going to get into today. And if you're in subject or names, you can click on those subjects and see all records that have been linked to that subject, so, and go from there. Now, if you want to get back to searching, you can either click on this and it'll take you back to the home page, or you can click on the search icon. It'll take you to a general search page rather than the home page, and you can search from here. The home page takes you to the more detailed, customized home page that you've created. So from here, similar to the staff side, people can search like Google. They can actually use quotations and asterisks and search throughout the record. They have the ability to limit their search by collections and digital materials. The default is keyword, but they can do title, notes, identifier. Now, keyword will search title, archival objects, titles, notes, subjects. It's going to search all the text available to it. So FYI, someone's searching and they're like, oh, I found this collection, but I don't know why it was associated with it. It's probably mentioned in the notes, and I need to go search in the notes or that kind of thing. You can also do dates, so years, and then do advanced searches with all Boolean operators, so and or not. It includes this, this or that, or it doesn't include, it should include this, but not that. Searches, and they can do multiple advanced searches. So if we're searching for something, again, love donuts, so we're just gonna do Krispy Kreme. Your search results appear similar to your browse results. You can refine, do a new or refined search, change the sort, do filters by text and years, and then additional filters. You see all the collections, the files, the series and subjects, all of those types of records that are associated with it. So if it's a file, you see in this these breadcrumbs, you see the repository, the collection, and then the series or sub-series associated with it. And if they were to go into a collection, they'd see a collection overview, so scope and content, note, dates, creator, language, any access restrictions, biographical or historical note, extent, any additional description information added to it, all of that. So, and then even subjects. And then on the side, collection organization, also the ability to search within the collection. They can see a scrolling finding aid, a container inventory, so all the boxes associated with it, and they can click on these and see what boxes, the boxes and what files or series are associated with them, wherever you have your containers listed. And any digital material you can actually see as a part of these tabs and be able to see those listed and be able to click on them and view them. Now, when you're in a collection, you will see multiple buttons to the right. So there's 3 buttons associated, well, 4 buttons that can be associated with a collection record. So citation, which if you added a preferred citation, this is where it would go, and they can click on that and see that. Print, which will generate a PDF. Staff only, which will take you back to the staff side into this record, so you can edit it. So it opens a new window. And then if you have it configured to be able to use, there's a request button. So if you use something like Aeon, that request button would appear and people can request the collection to use in the reading room or research room for research. So that would appear as part of these 3 buttons. So there's 4. You can configure to have all or none of these on. So it's like you pick and choose. So if you're using the public side, you don't have to use all of them. So do we have another question? So the public interface search is searching all records from all repositories associated with that ArchiveSpace instance. So if you have multiple repositories and you've published records from the different repositories, it's searching through all of them. So when you're searching in the public interface, and you have the option to limit records, like say we want Krispy Kreme, but we only want digital records associated with it, you click the drop down and click limit to digital materials. So we were asked, could you show the alternative to search all record types? So there's no digital records, but just have Krispy Kreme as text. Let's see. You can't limit to photographs, but with this limit by record type, but you can add and change it to like include photograph in your search term. So you can say Krispy Kreme and do photographs. And still it just gives you Krispy Kreme Corporation records rather than any other, so it goes directly to that. And you can see there are photographs in this collection. So it's found the series that has photographs. And then the other question was, is this public interface search option searching all repositories that have published records in ArchiveSpace, or is it only specific to single institution records? And I said it's searching all repositories that have published records in this ArchiveSpace instance. Since we have 2, the search is searching both of those repositories. Okay, if there are no more questions, we're going to move on to accession records. So we're going to go back to the staff side. which if you're in the public side and you scroll down to the bottom in your footer, should be a link to staff interface if you have that available to you, also a link to the ArchiveSpace homepage and your version information. So we are back in ArchiveSpace staff side. So as I mentioned before, you can create accession records from the create menu, and you can also create them by browsing your accessions and creating accession, clicking create accession. You also have the ability to import accession records. So if you have multiple that you need to import, you can do that through a CSV import. So we're going to create accession record. So this is the blank fillable basic accession record. There is only one required field of an accession record, and that is the identifier. Only required field, and it's unique. It must be unique to every accession record in your repository, but you can have the same accession, like the identifier for different repositories, especially if you do it by date. And it's like date plus the number of accession it's in, and you don't want to try to make that unique for every repository. You can, if they're not being used in the same repository instance, you can do that. So what you fill out in here is really dependent on you and your institution. So before you just start creating accession records willy-nilly, I would recommend coming up with policies and guidelines on how to fill these out and what you as an institution want to do. There will be standards around accessioning coming out. Rachel knows more about that than I do. And hopefully those will help guide us and make more standards of what should be required in an accession record in ArchiveSpace. So it's more than just the identifier, but the information in here is helpful, and you use whatever will be helpful to you as an institution. Now, accession records refer to your acquisitions. What new collections or additions are you getting at your institution? And this helps you get intellectual control over those materials. So it helps you describe them, keep information on them, and be able to better track them in a sense through this content management system. So you don't just have a spreadsheet somewhere listing all your accession records or nothing. So I highly recommend this as a great starting point with accession with your ArchiveSpace instance. Now there's some things that just appear when I'm doing certain things. So the green icon over here is a Grammarly icon. So you can use Grammarly in ArchiveSpace. There's some spell check built in certain fields, but not, I wouldn't rely on spell check in ArchiveSpace because it's not like a thing. So be aware of that. Create notes and things outside of ArchiveSpace when you're using it. So we're going to go through and build an accession record. So we just got a collection, the Jane Doe papers. It's an amazing collection of 50 cubic feet of materials on her life as a marine biologist. I'm going to go with that. We don't talk about scientists enough in ArchiveSpace. So the Jane Doe, the marine biologist. So it's a Jane Doe paper. So we're going to put that here. I recommend we at Georgia State and the other institutions that I've worked at always add the title that will be the collection title once it becomes a finding aid. That's the title we go with. But as you can see, this is up to you. It doesn't need to be the same, but it helps you to basically link the two and know that they're associated with, because you can add related accessions to resource records. So this way you're like, oh yeah, Jane Doe paper, that's a Jane Doe finding aids accession. So this was the second collection we got in 2024. So we're going to say 2024. Now you have 4 fields to fill out here. You can use numbers and letters, a mixture of them. If you start typing in this one and you're like, okay, I just want the year in here. And you're like, I have a number now. How do I make sure there's a space or something between them? If you use the second field, it will automatically add a period when this is like in the public interface or exported, that kind of thing. There's a period between these when you're like looking at them. If you don't want to use more and you're just like, I want them all in the same one, you can use underscores, that kind of thing. So be aware of that. So we're going to say this is 002 because we may get like 100 or more accession records and we want to be uniform. You can do that. The accession date is defaulted to the day that you're creating this record. Now, well, we got this a different date than today. I fortunately got too busy and couldn't accession it immediately. So I actually got it like on the 10th. So you can change the accession date. You can even go even further back. We've started using ArchiveSpace in I think 2017, 2018, something like that. And we have accession records that go back to the 80s. So you do not have to stick to when you started using ArchiveSpace or anything like that. You just need to type it in year, month, day format. So if this was received in 1988, October 1st, you can do that. And the calendar changes with you. So you can do all the going back in time that you want in here, but I just recommend typing ahead, typing it in rather than doing all that. And also doing sessions as soon as you can, but that's up to you. Now, when after that, again, all these other fields are not required, but you do have the option to publish these. You can choose to publish because you need to know if people are interested in this for research, and you're tracking how many times it gets requested, and so you want to publish it. Or your accessions, that's how you process. So you're actually done with this accession record. So this is just going to be published and people can request to see it. So you can do that. So you have the option to check publish. Once you saved it, there is a publish all feature because some other subfields of this have publish options, so you don't have to publish like all you can publish basic information only or other subfields as well. So next is content description. This describes the materials that are in this accession, like what's in the collection. This does go to a DAC standard. So this is following describing archives, the content standard, that standard that we use in archives. So you can give a content description here. So we know she's a marine biologist. This contains, this collection contains materials related to the life and career of Jane Doe. I can't spell today, that's why I also type in a Word document. Jane Doe, it includes, pay no attention to the yellow or green or red lines that appear. It includes research materials, correspondence, and photographs related to her time as a marine biologist. So here you can be as detailed or as sparse as you want to be. It doesn't have to be a complete description. You can expand this if you write more and you want to see all the text. You can expand this by going over here and clicking on that. They have default sizes. And then you can add dates in here, size, whatever, but there are fields to do that later on. A condition description also describes the state, the physical or like state of the material. So are they damaged? Are they fragile? Are they on obsolete media format? That kind of thing. So if there are preservation issues, even the basic, like there's a lot of rusted staples, you can add this here. So we'll say that photographs are fragile and need enclosures and includes 2 boxes of brittle newspapers, that kind of thing. So you can include that here. Again, you may not know the state of all materials, like the preservation state of this. So as you're reviewing it and about to create this record, you make note of that and you can add that here, kind of thing. So disposition, you can know if like things are being assigned to various different collections and resources. So say that you separate out audiovisual materials and you want to say that this will be added to the marine biologist photograph collection or marine biology photograph collection. You can say that here, or you can say that if there's already a collection created and you want to make note of that, that it has an identifier, that's what we put here as the identifier of the collection that's already been created. So we have that here, as well as it gets linked to if the resource record, if it's been created. As you see, when you go through these records, if you scroll over a field, you get these black boxes that give you information on that field, as well as examples. And if there is a standard associated with it, it gives you that. So I don't think I mentioned that earlier, but you do have ability to see what each field is referring to. And again, you click the question mark, you can go into the Help Center and see how to get help on creating basic information for an accession record and what each of these fields need. Now, an inventory is really what it says. You can type in here an inventory of this collection in its boxes so that, you know, you have that here. But if you have a spreadsheet, there's another place to link out to that. So this is really if you want to copy and paste that in here, add it to it. Now, provenance is who created it, where did it come from, that kind of thing. This was donated by Jane Doe herself, so we're going to write that here. Retention rule, if these are government documents, university records, that kind of thing, and there's a retention rule that applies to it, even like corporate records too, like you can type a note telling people to see a certain retention schedule so they know, oh, this is why we have this collection. Our corporate record retention schedule says we need to get this after 5 years, kind of thing. You can note that here. And then the general notes for any other information that you want noted in this record, but doesn't really fit in any of the other fields, even in basic information, are the sub-records that you can fill out. Acquisition type is what kind of collection is it? Is it the deposit, a gift from a donor, a purchase from a vendor kind of thing, transfer from another repository or institution, or yeah, those are the default. As you can see, there's multiple in here, and that's because of imports. This is a controlled value list that you can edit. So we're going to say this is a gift. The resource type is what type of collection is it? So the defaults in here are collection papers, records, and then publications is option 2. So is it a collection of materials, artificial collection? Is it papers of someone? Their manuscript materials, is it the records of a corporation, a university department, that kind of thing. So we're going to choose papers. Language of description is the language you're using to describe these materials. So we're using English, so you can type ahead and write English. Script of description is, again, like refers to like the script that that language is in. So it's Latin, so we'll do that. If there are any restrictions, access or use restrictions, and you want that noted, you can check this box. So say audiovisual materials won't be able to be used, you can click restrictions apply. If you want to be more detailed with that and make sure we know that it's an access restriction and not a use restriction, you can check this box and then add a note, an access restrictions note, noting why people can't access it, kind of thing. If it's both access and use, you can add both of those and check those boxes. These work with reporting kind of thing, and also help you on the staff side just know what's restricted and what's not. Then you get into your sub-records. In your sub-records, you have various ones. There's language. So this is the language of the materials, not the language you're writing this accession record in. So when you click add language, you see that more required fields show. For language, it's just the language that it's in. So you can choose English. If you want to scroll through and find English, you have that option too. If you want to add multiple language, say this is both in English and in Spanish, and you want to make note of that, you can. And the script is not required, but you can do that. And there are many languages to choose from. So I would suggest just typing ahead and seeing what's available. Yeah. So, and you can also add a language note. So that's a language of the materials note. So it describes, you can say what parts of the collection are in a certain language so people know. So our research materials are in English, but our correspondence is in Spanish, that kind of thing. You can add that note, and you can choose to have that note published or not published. You can add dates. So you could have dates in content description, but you can add them here. And these are the dates of the materials, dates with when they were created, but you can also choose other options. So creation is just the default. So you write an expression. So here, what's required is a label and the type, but an expression is optional. So we'll say these were created in 1980s through 2005. And so that's inclusive date. And then we can add a begin date. Expression is human readable, like we can read what that means. Begin and end dates are machine readable. And that's how when people search by years, they're searching these years. So it gets the in between. 2005. And then if you're typing in these follow DAX, so it's year, month, day, similar to the accession date. So, and you can again have the calendar to go back in time and do that. You can add certainty, era, calendar, that kind of thing. Calendar being the type of calendar being used. If this is approximate date, you can do that here. You can also just add circa in your expression. Extent, you add the size of the collection. You can do whole or part. So this is the whole collection, and part of this accession is only for part of the collection. So you want to make sure, or you have both digital and physical materials. So you want to make sure you're representing that in your extent. So say part of it is 13 gigabytes and the other part is 2 linear feet. You can do multiple accession records to represent those parts, and even do a whole if you want to. We said this was 50 cubic feet, so we typed the number, and we find in our drop down, which is also customizable, cubic feet. And then we can add the container summary, like how many boxes, if there's 50 record storage boxes or 2 oversized boxes and 48 record boxes, we can do that here. You can also add physical details. So describe the boxes, that kind of thing, especially if they're not standard like archival boxes and you want to make note of that, you can add that here. And then give the dimensions, like what are the dimensions of the boxes, that kind of thing. You can add agents. So this is like the creator and the donor. If you want to make note of that, you can add that here. You can create agent records. You will have to create them outside of the accession or resource record you're adding them to. So you can create those before this or while you're doing this, but we're not going to go over how you create them. Just know that you have the option to create them: person, family, corporate body, corporate entity, or software. So we're just going to hope that there's one in here. So when you're doing agent links, you can, in the accession record, you have the option to choose as the creator, the source, or the subject. The creator is the creator of the material. Source is who you got them from, and may not be the same as the creator. So say it's a comic book collection, and the source is the collector, but not the creator of the actual comic book. And then subject is that this is a subject of the collection, that kind of thing. And it could be the same as the creator. So be aware of that. So we're going to browse here. I'm pretty sure there's not Jane Doe here. So we're going to pick a random one to add to here. This looks like a cool name. Okay. And you're going to link it. You can add multiple creators of the same role or add ones for different roles, kind of thing. Now, related resources is exactly what it says. If you have a resource record and it is the resource record for the either this accession or for the materials you got, this is an addition and this is for the materials you got previously to this, you would have that resource record here and link it, kind of thing. Oops, I'm going into ArchiveSpace Help Center on accident. That can happen if not paying attention to where your mouse is. You can do component links. So that's linking archival objects. Say this accession is for a specific archival object in a resource record. You can link that here. So, and you can browse. You can't create them because they have to be created in with a resource record. So be mindful of that. But you can browse and filter these and search based on language, filter by language, search based on text, and find archival object records that are related to this or connected to this. So this is a new thing. It hasn't always been part of ArchiveSpace. So the component links are great, especially if you have you do different types of resource records and you're getting accessions at like a folder or series level, and you want to make sure you're linking to that series that it's being added to. You can do that here. There's more linkages and connections in ArchiveSpace happening all the time. You can even add related accessions. So again, these are additions, a part of it, a sibling of it. You can choose that in this subrecord. So it's a part of, use forms a part of, the succession forms a part of it, or has part of, say, there are materials being separated out to be a part of the photograph collection. You can say this forms or has a part of that photograph collection, and you can add the accession that it's also related to. So this photograph collection that we got, this is the part of it, and we're going to add that here. And the related type, and then you can also choose it's a sibling of, again, a sibling of. Choose the accession that's a sibling of, so they are connected. They're going to be a part of the same resource record. Their siblings are its family records, and they are completely different collections, but they are related. So you want all the family accessions connected. So say it's a Doe family, and we have Jane Does and we have John Does, and we want to make sure these sibling accessions are connected. We can do that with related accessions. So typically I would use part of for collections that form the whole of the whole resource, the whole collection. So what is it? So we keep getting multiple additions from a corporation, their organizational records. So we want to make sure we know that they are all related and they're part of the whole corporation's records at our institution. We would say that, and we would add all the accessions that are part of this whole to this, and also make sure we add the related resource record once it's created from this. So that kind of thing. And then, and you can do multiple of these. It does not have to be just one related accession. Again, multiple family members, multiple additions from a corporation, those can all be added to related accession. And you can add subjects, add the subjects of the collection, so you can link to those if this gets published. If you find that accession of that subject, and you click on it in the public user interface, it will include the accession in that list. So that's another linkage, another access point for people with your collection, with your accession records and all that. You can add external documents. So you create a spreadsheet inventory and it lives in like Microsoft SharePoint, or it lives on a file server or something, and you want to make sure you know where to find it. You can add that as an external document. They call it inventory and Jane Doe papers inventory, that kind of thing, or whatever the file name is, you can do that here. And then the location would be a copy of that link. It has to be a resolvable. It doesn't have to be, but ideally it's a resolvable URI. So the file path, that file path into a SharePoint, Google Drive, Dropbox, whatever, you can add that here. Or you can actually type where it is. It's on the J drive in the inventories, the 2024 inventories folder. You can say that here. So it doesn't have to be a URI. It's just ideal. So you can just copy that and paste it. If it's in your file explorer, you can again copy that and paste it to the file path, that kind of thing. But it's really up to you on how you use this field. But if you like this better than going back to basic information and adding, especially if it's a giant like 500 box accession and you don't want to add, you have inventory at least at a box level, and you don't want to put all that in this field, spreadsheets, Word doc, whatever you've created, you can do that as external document. And I forgot to mention, but on this left-hand side is navigation to the different types of sub-records. So when you click on them, it takes you to that sub-record. And so if you don't want to scroll through the whole record, you can do that. So you can choose to publish external documents or not. If it is something like donor information, because we link out to deeds of gifts here, because you can have multiple external docs. So we link out to deeds of gift, the forms we fill out for accession records, anything like that. And you don't want that published, you don't have to. But if you like for people to be able to see that inventory is in a Google Drive and you want to share that with people so they can view that inventory and request materials based on it, you can publish this so people can use that link and see the inventory, because since this is just an accession record, they're not able to see files associated with this and boxes, that kind of thing. You can add right statements, so copyright information, licensing, that kind of thing, any statutes of a government document or corporate documents that you want to make sure people are aware of, like you don't have the rights, so they have to reach out to a certain person for that, for permission. You can add that here. You can make metadata rights declarations here. We're not going to get into that right now, but that is an option. You can add instances, both physical containers and digital object instances, and you have the ability to do that. We're not going to go over how to create them right now, but you do have the ability to add those accession records, and you can add multiple. So if you want to make sure you have that represented here, you can do that. You can also add deaccessions. So if you go through accessions and do deaccessioning at that point, or if you've noticed how there might be duplicates in this, you can make note of that in the accession record and say, oh, it's not the whole collection. Well, you're not, if you want to deaccession the whole collection, you could make an accession record and then 20 years go by and be like, wait, we're not keeping all this. It's university records that we are destroying. You can do that here. You can also just say part of it and just write out any duplicates besides like 2 copies will be deaccessioned. So you can make note of what will be deaccessioned so people are aware of. Or if it's like personal taxes, stuff like that, you can make note of that here, and you can give a reason as to why, what happened to those. Did they go, were they part of a different, moved to a different institution, like transferred, weeded out, given back to the donor, that kind of thing. And if you notify the donor or whoever you need to about the accessions, you can check this box and make sure that's there. And then you can give it a date. If you do deaccessions, you do have to give a date for the accessions. So you have to, even if it's like this deaccession date later on, you can like do a judgment call. You can come back and do the whole deaccession later if you don't want to make note of that kind of thing. And you can even add extent, like how much was deaccession, you can do that here. Collection management fields, this is for like processing of it. So if you want to indicate the processing priority for this, which is a customizable field, you can go into this and choose, oh, this is high. Like the donor gave us money, they want to do an exhibit. We've had 10 people ask us for this. We're going to say this is high priority. We've determined the rights. You can check that box so you know that. You can even add in a processing plan. Again, that could be an external document that you can link out to or note where it is, so you don't have to add it here if you don't want to. If you know of who's going to process it or who you would like to process it, you can add them names here. How long you think it will take to process, you can do that. You can estimate that. And then the total extent and that kind of thing. And the extent type. So if you use this field, this has conditional requirements. That's what the grayed out asterisk means. You have to use this field. If you use this field, you have to use another, or you have to use both. So if you have grayed out, you scroll over to see what's required with these grayed out asterisks. So this one, if you provide processing total extent, like the number associated with the extent, you have to give the type. So if we just put 50 here, it won't let us save it because we didn't give the extent type. And we're not going to click save just yet. So 50 cubic feet. You can say the total processing hours, like once it's done, how many actual processing hours it took. And then the funding source. Is this grant funded? Is it funded by a foundation, the donor, that kind of thing? You can say that here, and you can get processing status. Again, this doesn't get published at all. It's just internal, so you can fill this out and not worry about users, like researchers, seeing it. So you can say, oh, this is in progress, that kind of thing. And then you have classifications, which are record groups, and you can add that here. And then user defined fields is fields that you can create and define as you see fit. Don't really use them. If you're interested in them and have access to the help center, you can learn more about them there. And then let's save the accession. Don't do what I did and just keep creating things and not save. Save as you go through. Once you get your required fields filled out, just save it. Go ahead and save it. So once you've saved it, you see this nice green bar up here. That indicates that it's been saved, nothing wrong happened. But say we deleted identifier and you click save. It will tell you it will give you the red bar. That means that there's an error, you forgot to fill out something. It will also tell you what you forgot to fill out. So if it's multiple fields that were required and not filled out, it will tell you. You can even click on this and it will take you to that field. So you know, oh, that's what I forgot to fill out, and there it is. Let me do that real quick and save this accession. So from here, After you've made sure your required fields are done, you see that you now have the ability to view published. So if anything was published, you can click on that and see the published accession record and all its niceness. You can also click on add event. So add an event to this. We're not going to get into that, but you have these options with created record. You can, let me cancel that. You can transfer this to a different repository, calculate extent, create assessment, suppress this so people, certain user types can't see this record, and delete it. So if you go click on spawn, you have the ability to spawn a resource record, another accession. So if there's related accession, the part of this whole that you want has similar information and you want that information to transfer, be in another record, you can spawn that. And so if you spawn it, you just get the new record. It's not saved. It transfer over certain information like title, date, not identifier, content description, condition description. If you filled out these basic information, it's going to transfer that, as well as languages, dates, extent. So if anything is different in those, it didn't transfer over external documents, as you can see. And you would have to add the related accession. But if any of this is different, you want to edit it, you can do that and add the identifier, that kind of thing. If you want to spawn an archival object, that would be an archival object associated with a resource. You have to choose the resource record it's going to be a part of. You can't just spawn a random archival object. It has to be associated with the resource record. So if this is an item going to be a part of a larger collection, say it's a comic book you got in and you're adding it to creating an archival object as a part of an overall comic book collection, you can do that. And then you can spawn a resource record. And again, only certain information transfers over, such as your content description, note, and like other information. So we're getting into resource records after the break. So I will not go over that information. Just let you know that certain records transfer over, like certain notes, like your condition description as physical description, your content description as scope and content. And it will add a related accession to this resource record. So before we get into the break, are there any questions? And I can take questions after the break if you're still mulling it over. Feel free to put any questions in the Q&A if you have them.
I did answer one question that had come in. Deborah had asked, how can we change what is listed as options to search on the PUI homepage? So like the words like home, repositories, collections, they say that their institution does not include record groups. So I just mentioned that most customization for the public user interface is done through the configuration file and dropped a link, but I can drop the link to that documentation in the chat as well.
Yeah, yeah, PUI customization also depends on your host and if you're self-hosted. So they would also have to do that work too, to be aware of that. There is a question in the chat. Can you have a question about multiple repositories? Can you have them totally separate and never integrate, i.e. two different departments want me to use ArchiveSpace for the collections, but have nothing to do with each other and no overlap? I would like to have a public user interface for each repository that is totally separate for each repository. I have never run across that case. Like if you use the same ArchiveSpace implementation, the same instance, you won't get overlap with accessions, digital objects, and resource records on the staff side, all other record types will have overlap and can be used by both. But on the public side, you can choose whether or not a repository has its records published by not publishing them. I don't know of them having two separate public interfaces because it's connected to that instance. So you would have to have two different ArchiveSpace instances if I'm thinking of this correctly. What do you think, Rachel?
Yeah, I think that I agree.
Yeah, so, and managing two ArchiveSpace instances can be very difficult. Or not very difficult, it's just unwieldy sometimes. There are consortiums that have multiple archive spaces. I'm not sure if they use the same instance or not. It's really depends. And then someone asked, I may have missed this step, but what makes the record appear as being processed instead of unprocessed? So on the public side, unprocessed materials refers to accession records. Process means you have organized it, it has a finding aid, and now it's a resource record kind of thing. Unprocessed is it's not organized, it's not available for research yet, that kind of thing. And really that's up to your institution to determine if it's processed or unprocessed. But accession records are typically referring to unprocessed collections. Anything to add, Rachel?
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is that is one of the I think really common customizations with the PUI is some institutions do not want their unprocessed accessions to be discoverable, so that is totally an option that some people take advantage of.
Yeah, all these tabs up here do not have to be published. They are they are configurable, so you can only have the tabs that have records that you've published, seen, or just have all of them seen, that kind of thing. So if you just have collections and digital materials and subjects, you can just have those seen and don't have to have any of the other ones. Okay, well, we are in our break time and I want to give you guys plenty of break. So if you have other questions about what we've gone over, accessions, the application overview, just put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them after break. But we're going to now take a 15-minute break. So we will come back at, let me let the time go over. So we're so close to 22. What is that, 37? We're going to come back at 37 after the hour. So it's 1:22 here, so 1:37 if you're on East Coast time, but 37 minutes after the hour.
So let me put my screen up. Okay. So we are going to tackle resource records in two parts. We'll start with simple, what we call single level resource records, and then we'll go from there. In ArchiveSpace terminology, resources are sort of a unit of materials that are in the custody of an archival repository. And, a resource can be a single item, it could be a scrapbook, or it could be many items that are aggregated together to form some kind of a unit like a collection. And so resource records are where you do the bulk of your work describing your collections and other activities that help you manage them. It's also how you can create access tools for your materials, such as finding aids, MARC records, and other metadata records. And resources are one of the places where you can do physical arrangement and indicate specific physical items as well as where they live. Because of the limited time we have today, we're not going to get into how you create and manage individual boxes and folders very deeply, but there is a lot of great documentation and videos on that you can refer to. So you can create a new resource record in a few different ways. We saw before the break that you can spawn a resource record from an accession record, but you can also create one from a blank template. To bring this form up, you can either select the resource option from the Create menu. So here, Create Resource, or if you are browsing your entire list of resources, you can also select this Create Resource button. They do the same thing. So now we have a blank resource record template. This top section is referred to as the basic information section. The red asterisks that we saw earlier in the accession record section indicate that the field is required. So here we can see that in order to create and save this resource record, we need a few things. We need a title, we need an identifier, and we need a level of description. There are a few other requirements, but we'll get to those in a minute. So I'm going to create a sample resource record, and I hope some of you like the Grapes of Wrath, but that is what this is based on. So I'm creating, I have a title, I have an identifier, and then I need a level of description. So this is a drop-down menu, and I'm going to select collection. This is a drop-down list that indicates what unit or part of the record you're dealing with. This is probably going to make a little bit more sense in the next section when we talk about multi-level records and hierarchy. But usually when you're describing a collection at the highest level, you're going to select an option like collection or maybe even fonts, but I'm going to select collection. So we have a few more fields in this basic information section. These are optional. So it's really up to you and your institution whether you want to use them or whether they make sense for your individual collections. Please don't feel overwhelmed by all of the options for information that you might record. They are available to you, but that doesn't mean that they are always relevant or useful for your particular context. So some of these are really similar to what we saw in the accession record. You have the option to say what type of collection you're dealing with. This is a papers collection. I want to point out this publish checkbox. It's come up a little bit before, but it's really important. If you're using the public user interface, this checkbox determines whether your record shows up there or not. And if you plan to export files manually, such as EAD or MARC records, this checkbox also impacts what parts of the record show up in that exported file. So I'm going to select that we want this published. The restrictions apply checkbox, we saw that in the accession record. Just kind of something to note about those is that it is still sort of up to you if you use that checkbox that you need to come up with workflows and processes for how you want to enforce and manage materials with restrictions. The repository processing note is an internal only note, so it won't show up in the public user interface or in export, even if you've selected that everything in the record should be published. So this can be really useful if you want to explain things for your colleagues and you maybe don't want that information to be publicly viewable. So now that we've added some really important high-level information about the collection, let's look at some other ways for how we can describe it. And we can do this with subrecords, which we saw earlier with accession records. And these are ways to record specific types of information. So here we have a languages subrecord, which is a requirement. So I'm going to say that this collection is in English. If I wanted to, I could also create a free text language of materials note. Brittany explained sort of the utility of how these work together earlier, so I won't belabor that point. If at any point you want to, if you've sort of opened or started to add a note or a subrecord and decide you don't want to do that anymore, you can just select these X's and then select confirm removal. So let's say I don't want to add that language of materials note anymore. We have the ability, we need to add at least one date. So I'm gonna add a couple dates. I'm gonna add an inclusive date to maybe say that, you know, our earliest material is from 1830 and our most recent material is from 1998. But that's a pretty big range. So this node is repeatable, or this subrecord is repeatable. So I'm going to add what's called a bulk date to just provide a little bit of clarity to say that, you know, yes, we do have something as early as 1830 and as late as 1998, but the bulk of what we have in the collection is from, let's say, 1940s to the 1970s. And so this is another place where we can kind of use machine readable dates and the date expression together. So I'm going to say that this is circa 1940s to circa 1960s. So you can kind of use these things together. And then I'm going to create at least one extent statement. I'm just making this up completely, but we'll say it's 20 linear feet in 20 record cartons. But maybe I also want to shout out the fact that there are, I don't know, some AV materials. So I'm going to say that there's, you know, 12 reels, something like that. Whether you create multiple extent statements and how is, you know, really a personal preference or an institutional preference. But it can be really useful. Okay, so now we will move into what's called the finding aid data section. And this is used to record information about your archival description. Again, you don't have to use all of these fields, and a full explanation of each is available either in the Help Center or with the rollover tips, which you can see me. If you hover over, they'll appear and explain things. Let's see, but this section is really helpful if you produce public access tools like a finding aid. And it's also very helpful for internal workflows to be able to know, you know, who wrote the description and when, and other things like that. So I'm just going to fill in a couple of these fields, but you can always look for more information if you would like. So I am going to fill in this EAD and EAD location. So usually the EAD ID is similar or the same as your identifier, but that's a local practice. And EAD refers to encoded archival description, and it's a way to structure information in a standardized way. So the EAD is an identifier for the EAD file that can be generated from a resource record. And this EAD location is the location that either the file will live, so it could be, you know, a path to a file directory, or it could be a URL for maybe where a finding aid lives online. The EAD ID field is one that actually shows up a fair amount throughout the application, especially if you start working with spreadsheets. So it is a really good thing to know about. So I'm just going to fill in a few other fields here, so I'm going to say the finding aid was written in September of 24, and I wrote it. I'm going to indicate that I used describing archives at content standard as my descriptive standard, but you can refer to other descriptive rules if you like. This is one of those controlled value lists that Brittany mentioned, so you can add to it, you can merge if you get duplicate items. But I'm going to say that I've used DAX. These next two fields, these are required, which you can tell from the red asterisk, but it's asking you to indicate both the language of your archival description and the writing system, the script. So I am writing in English. and the script is Latin. And I also usually fill in this free text note about the language of description. But that can be really helpful, especially if you're doing any bilingual archival description or translation. If you had maybe a sponsor or a funding organization, you could write who supported your processing work here. And you can also use some of these other fields for sort of internal workflow management. So for example, you could indicate the status of the finding aid if you wanted to, whether you've published it, and any other kind of information about the finding aid. Okay, you can also edit resource records over time. So something that's really helpful is you can add a revision statement. So if you've edited an existing resource record, maybe updated the description, added a new series, you can write something here to indicate when that happened, who did it, and sort of roughly what they were doing. So I'm just gonna get rid of that though for a moment. So we already have a fair amount of description here, so I'm going to save my resource record in its current state. So I'm going to do that by clicking this blue button right here. And we have a green message up here saying that it was successfully created. And now you can kind of see that my view looks a little bit different. Now that I've created the resource record, I have this new window up here that kind of shows me the collection and any potential hierarchy that's underneath it in this top window. So that is something that we're going to see more of in the next section. You also have breadcrumbs up at the top here. Again, that'll probably become a little bit more clear when we talk about series and whatnot. But these are always going to be up here at the top to help you orient yourself of just, where you are in the application, where you are within a record. And you can always use those to return to a specific place or a higher level. Let's see. You can, similar to accession records, you can link agents and subjects to your resource record. So I'm just going to do a couple of those here. I want to indicate who created this collection. So you can type ahead. I'm using only agents and subjects that I know are already in the database, but you do have the ability to create new agents directly from here if you wanted to. So to do that, you would just click this down arrow and select create, and then the type of agent you want to create. But I am going to select, I know what's already in here. So you can either type ahead or you can browse. So I'm going to browse for Tom Joad, and I'm going to link him as the source. And I'm going to specify that the type of source he is the donor. I can also do the same thing with subjects. So again, I'm kind of, I know some subjects that are already in here. So I'm typing ahead because I know that they're already in here. But if I maybe wasn't sure, and maybe if I had a lot of subjects in the database, and maybe even if I typed ahead, it still wasn't giving me exactly what I wanted. Sometimes the browse feature is a little bit easier. So you can just filter or facet, and then you can select and then link from there. So we still have more ways to describe materials, and one of the major ways is through what are called notes. This is where you can complement some of the more structured data that we've already added with free text description that we're creating ourselves. There is a large number of note types available, and we won't go over each type, but the Help Center is a great resource if you have questions about those. So to create a note, you want to navigate to this note section. And again, you can either do that just by scrolling or using this left-hand navigation. You'll want to select the Add Note button, and then you're prompted to select what type of note is that you'd like. So this is a drop-down list, and you can kind of see the wide variety of options. A few that I want to point out are this conditions governing access, which if that restrictions apply checkbox piqued your interest earlier, you might want to consider using this note to clarify what those restrictions are. The immediate source of acquisition is a way to identify where a collection came from and when and what those circumstances were. The scope and contents note is a place for you to summarize what kinds of material are in the collection, what they document, and what larger context they fit into. And then processing information is perhaps my favorite, one of the, I think, lesser appreciated notes, but this is a place for you to record what you did, why, and explain any decisions that you made, and on and on and on. There's a large number of notes that you can select. So I'm just gonna do a couple to give you a sense of what they look like. So let's add an immediate source of acquisition note. And when you select it, you can kind of see how it's structured. You'll see the type of the note. There's an opportunity to change the label, which we'll do in the next note that I create. And then there's checkboxes to indicate if it should be published or not. And then there's going to be a component where you actually enter the data into the field. So I'm going to say that this collection was donated by Tom Jode in 1998. And there you go. Let's add another. So maybe I think we said that there's some sound reels in this collection. I might want to specify and set expectations for my researchers that users can only use reformatted audiovisual materials. So I'm creating a physical characteristics and technical requirements note. But that admittedly is not a super intuitive phrase. So I'm going to change how that is displayed by the label. So I'm going to type in here audiovisual policies. And when I export this record, or if it's in the public user interface, if I have anything in this label field, it's going to supersede the type. So I'm going to say, users must use, or let's see, original audiovisual materials are not available for research. Users must request reformatted copies or something like that. You get the idea. And let's see, maybe just one more note while we're here. I'll show you the conditions governing access note because it's a little bit structured a little bit differently. So you can see this one's a little bit more complex. So we have our kind of free text field down here, which we can use to explain our situation. And then up at the top, we have a few other things that we haven't seen before. We have a begin and end structured date field, as well as sort of a drop down or a single select option to clarify what kinds of restrictions we're dealing with. So let's just say, for example, that like diaries in series 1 are restricted until 2050 or something like that. So we can specify that maybe this was a restriction imposed by the donor as opposed to one that we restricted or we imposed on ourselves or was because of a physical condition. And then we can put begin and end dates that specify when things will be available again. So I'm going to just say that these, oh, I think I need to do it the other way, 2050, January 1st. And then we can do the begin date for today. So that's a slightly different type of note, and a few of the notes have slightly different structures that you can familiarize yourself with. So I'm just going to save this. Okay, so now we can see that this record has language information, has dates, has extents, has a few agents and subjects linked to it, and it has some notes available. We also have a lot of the same subrecords that were available in the accession record. So I won't go into them I won't really go into them because they work really similarly, but they are available down here. So the notes help us describe our collections, aspects about them, and what we have done to them for the benefit of both users, our future selves, and our colleagues. So we're going to go back up to the top of this record. So you can either scroll, or on the left-hand navigation, you can hit basic information and it'll bring you up to the top. I wanted us to look at the toolbar for a resource record now that we've created one and kind of filled it out a little bit. So let's see, we can add an event. Again, we won't talk about events today, but just know that you can do that. And then these next two buttons, publish all or unpublish all, are really helpful. So all of these published checkboxes that show up throughout the record, you have the ability to change them in bulk for this particular record. So the publish all is going to select all of the published checkboxes for this resource record to being checked. The unpublish all does the same. View published, it's going to open that up. That shows what this resource record looks like in the public user interface. Export, you have a lot of different options to export this information. So you have EAD files, and you have some different options for exporting EAD files depending on what makes the most sense to you and whatever systems that you are using. You can export MARC files, but there's also some other options. So you can download container labels, and this is also where you can generate a PDF of your resource record. Sometimes people prefer to share information about their collections that way. Merging and transferring are a little bit beyond what we can talk about today, but just know that there are ways to transfer a record to another repository or to merge two records together. Under this More button, there are some really useful things, like the ability to calculate extents and calculate dates, as well as create an assessment record. And like the other records, you have the ability to suppress it, to hide it from certain users with certain permissions, or to delete it. So just looking at the time, I think we're 2 minutes behind schedule, so we'll take questions at the end. So I'm gonna build off what we just talked about and move into what we call multi-level resource records. And by that, we mean that there's a hierarchy in our resource record. So this could mean a collection that contains series, and within the series, you might have individual files, but it could go many levels down. ArchiveSpace employs the principle of inheritance, by which we mean that information present at one level carries forward as you descend down the hierarchy. So right now we have description that applies to the whole collection, and we don't have to repeat it every level down that we go. So if I say, for example, that materials are open without restrictions at the collection level, I don't have to repeat it for individual series and so forth. I'm going to use some terminology to describe intellectual hierarchy. That might sound a little odd at first, but I just want to explain what I mean by them. So you'll hear me say parent, child, and sibling when describing hierarchy. A parent is the level above, a child is the level below, and a sibling is the same level. So you can think of that a little bit like a family tree, if that's helpful. And hopefully, as we go through this section and sort of show what that looks like in practice, it'll feel a little bit more comfortable. Excuse me. Just as a note, we're really talking about intellectual hierarchy right now. We won't get into too much of the nuts and bolts of boxes and folders and how you manage them, but I will point that out. How deep you go into your hierarchy is really up to you. You can create subseries within series and even sub-subseries. You can also nest individual archival components under each other. And that could be really useful in some cases where maybe you have both paper materials and a video recording, but that's just one use case. That said, if you export your resource records as EAD files, I would recommend that you're mindful about how deep you create your hierarchy, as EAD can only accommodate up to 12 levels deep. So we're going to use our Jode family papers here to show what that hierarchy looks like and how you can create it. So right now it is a single level resource record, but let's say that we've now processed it and we want to indicate the different parts of the collection as well as some individual folders or items. So to create a series, I'm currently at the collection level because that's the only thing available to me right now. I'm going to select Add Child. And this brings up an archival object template. When I say archival object, I mean a record nested under something else. So we are going to call this Series 1, Oklahoma Family Papers. I don't technically need a title. It's only conditionally required with that gray asterisk, but I do want to be more descriptive. The only requirement is this level of description. So I am going to say that this is a series. I do have the ability to add dates and extents and other information, but I'm going to keep it simple right here. And I have the ability to save this a few different ways. I can click Save at the top, can click Save Archival Object here, or if I want to save this, but also create another series at the same level, I can select +1, which is what I want to do actually. So +1, and I'm going to call this Series 2, Great Depression Migration. And this is also a series. And I'm just going to click Save right now. If I wanted to create one more series, I can see that this second series is highlighted for me right now. So because of that, if I want to create another series, so something just at the same level, I can select Add Sibling. So I'm going to select that. And this is going to be our last series, Series 3, Jode Labor Organizing Papers. The level is, again, it is a series, but you do have other options available. Okay, if I wanted to, I could create subseries. So for example, if I want to create subseries in series 2, I'm going to highlight that and I'm going to select Add Child because I want this to be nested underneath series 2. So we're going to say this is sub-series A, Route 66 migration. And this is a subseries. And if you have one subseries, you should probably have a second. So this is subseries B, migrant camps. And the level is subseries. To be clear, you don't have to add series or subseries to your collections if you don't want to. This is just something that is available. So far, all we have done is create intellectual hierarchy or arrangement for our collection. We have our series or our discrete sections of the collection, but we also probably want to indicate specific items that are in our series. So let's do a little bit of that in our first series where the Joad family is still living in Oklahoma. So I want to navigate back up to this series 1. I want to make sure it's highlighted. And to create my first archival object that's nested under this series, I'm going to select Add Child because I want it to be underneath this series. This is the same archival object form. So I'm going to say that we have photographs. And this time I'm going to say that this is a file. You could certainly use item or another option, but I'm going to use file. And again, you could add a date or other information, but just to kind of speed us through the process, we're going to keep it pretty simple. I'm going to use the +1 to create another file. So this is correspondence. Also a file, and then maybe just one more, something for the Joad family farm. And we're going to save. And then let's just create one more under this subseries B. So I navigate to where I want to be, and I'm going to add another child. And this is going to be for the weed patch camp ephemera that we have in our collection. Let's see. So yeah, now we have a little bit more information. You can see this top window pane as you fill out your collection has a lot more information in it. And so you can expand, if there's things nested underneath, you can expand them with these downward arrows or collapse them. So if we didn't want to see everything in series 1, we could collapse it, which is really helpful for larger collections with a large, what we call tree. So again, we've only talked about the collection and parts of it intellectually. We haven't done anything to indicate what box something is in. And like I said before, we won't have time to get into it too deeply, but I do want to show you where this happens. So let's go up to our photographs. And so for the archival object or whatever that you are interested in recording, you will want to go down to this instances subrecord. So I'm going to use the left-hand side to zoom down there. So the instance is where we talk about the physical thing and where it is in reality. So this is where you can record things like box and folder information, or where you can add digital objects, which we'll talk about in a second. So briefest of brief overviews, if you do this, you want to say add container instance. It'll ask you for a type. The default is sort of mixed materials. And to create a box or to create a container, top container really refers to the highest level of enclosure that something is in. So if you have a letter inside of a folder, inside of a box, the top container is the box. And I like to think of it as the thing that's on the shelf. So I'm going to select create, which brings up the top container record. The only thing required here is the indicator. So I'm going to say that this is 1, but I would also recommend adding a container type like a box or whatever. You can add barcode information. You can link it to a location. You can do a lot of things. So when I select this create and link button, I'm doing 2 things. I am both creating and saving this top container record, and I'm also linking it to this particular archival object. So I'm doing 2 things at once. And if I wanted to be even more specific to say that this material is in particular folders inside of this box, I could say that we're talking about box 1, folders maybe 1 through 3. And I'm going to save my object. We'll just quickly show you how you get to a box that's already created. So let's say we have our correspondence. I'm going to go down to instances, add container instance. still mixed materials. And now, because I know I already have a box one, I'm going to type ahead and select it. You can also browse for boxes if you're maybe not quite sure, or if it's a little bit more difficult to get to them. So we're going to say that this is box 1, folder 4. And you can see up in this tree, in this top window, now that we've added physical information about where something lives, this box and folder information shows up on the right-hand side. If you've created an archival object, maybe in the wrong place in the record, you can change that by using this reorder mode. So I'm going to select, maybe this correspondence actually belongs in a different series. I'm going to select enable reorder mode, and I'm going to find that particular archival object, and I'm going to, maybe it belongs in series 3, so I'm going to drag it down here. And oh, sorry, I needed to drop it as a child, but I'm going to drop it where it belongs. So you can move things around if you want to. I'm going to disable this reorder mode. I wouldn't recommend it for moving a lot of things around within your collection, but it can be really handy. We have about 6 more minutes, so there's just a couple of more things I'd like to show you. So far, we've done everything manually. And I think that's sort of a really good way to show you sort of what's available to you and how things work. But it's also not always the most efficient way to do something, especially for a larger collection. So I'm just going to show you a couple of other ways to get information, especially archival objects, into a resource record. So the first of these ways is called rapid data entry. It is admittedly a tool that's either people really love or don't use at all. So you can find out which camp that you belong in. So I'm gonna set this up so that I'm creating archival objects to go into this 3rd series. So I'm gonna select that series, and then I'm gonna click rapid data entry. And this is going to be so fast, but there is a video on it that goes into it in more detail. So it's sort of spreadsheet adjacent in that it creates rows and it has columns, but it's not quite as robust as an actual spreadsheet. So it's sort of somewhere in between. But it is a really helpful way to add a lot of information into a resource record pretty easily. And you can create templates and save them. So if you have student workers or volunteers, you can create a template for them to use. You can remove columns. So a lot of this is stuff I'm not actually going to create. So you can remove columns that get some of this out of your eyesight. So I'm not going to specify maybe language or extent for every archival object. I maybe want a more streamlined version with just maybe my title, my dates, my extent, or not my extent, sorry. So I'm just going to get rid of anything that I'm not interested in to make it easier to work with. And you can see there's a lot available to you. Doesn't mean you have to use it all. So just because of time, I'm not actually going to go through this entirely. The blue field means that it's sticky, which means that your information will carry over from one row to a next. So for example, I probably don't want my date expression or date begin to be the same row to row. But I'll just kind of show you a little bit what it looks like. So I'm going to say that these are file and my screen is kind of requires some scrolling, but let's just say that these are also in box 1. So I'm going to add a row, and we're going to and one more. So you can keep going on like this. I'd recommend that you validate your rows before you try and import them, just so that you can catch any errors. And I'd also recommend that if you're using this, you save your rows and do it pretty early and often. You don't want to get timed out or anything like that, or accidentally close your window and then lose a lot of information. So I know I went through this super quickly, but if this is a tool that you're interested in working with, try it out, look at the videos and see if it makes sense to you. I'm gonna try and save these. Depending on how many rows you've created, that might take a little bit longer to show up. So you can see that these all showed up here. And in the final minute, I want to show you one other thing. Let's see, one of the most popular ways to get a lot of information into ArchiveSpace. It's called Load via Spreadsheet. It's this button up here. We're not going to go through it, but to use this, you need to already have a collection level record in ArchiveSpace, and you need to have something in the EAD ID field that we saw earlier. You also need to use a specific template, and that is located in this gear menu under bulk import templates. And you are going to be looking for either one of these bulk import AO templates. There's both a CSV and an Excel file. So which one you use is going to be dependent on your preferences and what systems that you like to work with. You're gonna fill out the spreadsheet. I'll just download it really quickly. And sort of similar to that rapid data entry screen, when I first pulled it up, there was so many rows and columns available to you. Don't get overwhelmed, even though it's so overwhelming, but it's really just like all of the options that are available to you. So you can kind of see some of these similar fields and types of subrecords and notes that are available to you. You can essentially create that in your spreadsheet and then use that to import into your resource record. One of the great things about this is that you can work with different levels of hierarchy. So you can, for example, create a series, then a subseries, and then files under that series, and then go back to another series. You can kind of do it all in here. I would recommend that if you start using this, that you hide the columns that you're not interested in working with, but don't delete them. If you delete them, the mapping will get sort of out of alignment, and ArchiveSpace won't know how to map your data. And the first couple of times you use it, you might get some errors, but I really would recommend that you stick with it and give it a shot, because once you get the hang of it, you're going to use it all the time. It is such a time-saving device. And if you really run into issues, the ArchiveSpace listserv is always a great place to turn to ask about error messages and that. So I know that was a super quick overview of not just this functionality, but resource records generally. But to keep us on schedule, I will hand it over to Brittany to talk about digital objects. And if there are questions about this, we can tackle those in the Q&A.
Thank you, Rachel. So yes, please put any questions you have about resource records into the Q&A. We did answer one previously. I just answered it. It was about the format fields and like the drop down. Can you tailor the format fields to designate specific sizes or types, such as 10-inch reels or 7-inch reels? And the answer is yes, depending on the drop down. In your controlled value list, you can add those, and then you can add those into your extents as well, so, and notes and all of that. So you have options. So let's go over digital objects, fun stuff. So digital objects is another one of the material description records. ArchiveSpace enables the description of digital objects, such as digitized archival resources, are born digital material. So why would you use digital objects? Like, what's the benefit there? So functionally, ArchiveSpace supports the management of digital object metadata, so that's descriptive information, both technical and otherwise, allowing you to manage descriptions of your archival holdings conveniently and efficiently within this single system. But it's important to note that while you can optimize ArchiveSpace for management of metadata records, it does not support the direct management of content files. It is assumed that files will be stored and managed in a network, in another system, a web accessible location, such as a file server or your digital asset management system that is capable of managing such files. So the actual files themselves, that digital material, must be stored elsewhere and can't be stored in ArchiveSpace. But digital objects are ArchiveSpace makes it handy to describe them, so that's one of the reasons why you would use them, especially if you have a lot of digital materials and you want another way for your users to access and connect to those. If you have a public website, you can link to it. So in ArchiveSpace, it is understood that a digital object is comprised of 3 items. That includes the metadata record. So it can range from descriptive information to support discovery of the resource, to rights information or technical details about the digital file that make up the object. It can also include structural metadata, defining the logical or physical relationship of the content files comprising of complex digital object, which I'll tell you more about in a moment. Metadata is represented in the form of a structured data record. And then the second thing that is in a digital object is the content file. So digital files that range from still to moving images to audio recordings to textual documents such as your PDFs. Indeed, any digital file type can be represented in a digital object record. And often a digital object may include multiple files of different types, but having the same content. So if you're digitizing your photographs and you want a master copy, an access copy, and then the thumbnail, you can represent all 3 of those in ArchiveSpace and give like technical details on all 3 of those. And then the last thing that ArchiveSpace says that a digital object is comprised of is that link or a digital wrapper that binds the metadata with the content file. So the actual link to where the content lives, that's the digital wrapper, like that's the content. And then we have the digital object that will link us to the actual content. So when we think about digital objects in ArchiveSpace, so if we were to browse a digital object and just look at one, we think about their structure. So similar resource records, digital objects can be very simple or they can be complex. And you will have a range of subrecords associated with them. So fields that you can fill out and add more descriptive information to. So the simple versus complex. A simple object is one with which the intellectual content of the object is contained in one digital content file and its variants. So the one photograph, the master, access, and thumbnail, those are all one simple object that we're being represented in one. The one we're seeing on the screen is a simple object. So they are single level in structure. So it's just that one level. There's no hierarchy here. And then comprise a metadata record describing the entire item bound with a content file and all its variants. So we have all this information associated with it. And we'll get into more details about each of these fields. So a complex object is one in which the intellectual content is distributed over 2 or more digital content files. So say you have a journal, someone's journal, and they have multiple pages written on it, and you've digitized as single pages and also the whole, and you want to make sure that's represented in ArchiveSpace. You would create a complex object with a hierarchy and a structured record. So just to make sure each of those digital files are represented. And so there's parts to the whole overall kind of thing. So they're multi-level in structure. They comprise a parent level metadata record, so this top level, and then which represents the description for the entire item. And then they have component records for the individual content files. And you can make this as rich and as detailed as you would like, depending on the files and what you decide. How you use digital objects is fully dependent on you, and it's, again, not a requirement for you to use when using ArchiveSpace. So when creating one, and we're going to create, if we have time, we'll create complex, but we're definitely creating a single, a simple object. So we're going to actually create for this image here. It's one of my favorite images at Georgia State University. This girl with her sunglasses and her Easter bunny. I want to be her. And now that's in a recording, so I will be her. So we're going to describe this. Typically, you wouldn't already have well, it depends on your institution. You can just create digital objects after the fact, after they're already in digital collections, using spreadsheets and adding that data in, or you can create them as they're being digitized. It's really your process, and actually how many you have will probably determine that end. So we're going to create this one. We have data associated with it. So we're going to go back over here. We're going to click create digital object. So the only required fields in a digital object record are the title and identifier. The title is whatever title you've given to this item. And the identifier is a mixture of letters and numbers. It can have periods and underscores. As you can see, there is no multiple fields. It's just open field. So if you want separation between numbers and letters and all that, you have to add it. You can determine if it's the identifier that's associated with that file, or if it's like URL, a handle, that kind of thing. Like, you determine what goes into this. So the title for this one that we're going to copy is Atlanta Symphony Orchestra Children's Concert at Lenox Square, circa 1960. We're going to leave out the date. You can add the date to the title, but we're going to do DAX and add date and date field. So we're going to paste that here. Be careful with your pasting from other sites and such. You may get weird formatting. And then we're going to add an identifier. We have an identifier here. This identifier is collection ID, so the collection number, the box, and then the item in that box. You can choose to publish it, or when you're done, you do have the publish all option, so you can publish along the way or not. The VRA core level, that is, give me 1 second. So the VRA core level, you choose from a non-configurable control value list, so you can't change this. It's based on a standard. It's primarily for use in multi-level VRA core compliant records to indicate that a description is about a collection, a work, or an image. So if you're creating those complex objects and you want to use that, that's great. It's a collection of them. You can do that, or you can use it for your single object. It's just what is this in terms of VRA, but it's not required. Then the digital object type is a configurable list. So if you don't see the type, or if you want to change this up, you can. This is a list that can be changed up. It's a generic term indicating the basic content type of the digital object. And this does correspond to a mods field. So these certain fields in here will correspond to different digital material like standards. our digital description standard, so be aware of that. So this is an image, so we're going to choose still image. You can check if restrictions apply, like they can't use it in things, like you want to make note of that in each digital object, you can. And then you're going to choose the file, add a file version. Again, you can make this as simple as or as complicated as you want, but typically you want to add a link. So the next step would be to add a file version, and this is where you add the link to the actual content file. Like, where is it? Where can they access this? So the file URI is the only thing required when you open the sub record. So that's the only field required. And this is a resolvable URI, like something that makes it accessible either on the web or links to a file directory, that kind of thing. So we're going to copy the link here. If you use permalink handles like DOIs, or those kind of things, I would highly recommend using those links in your digital objects. So if you ever change systems, the links, unique links, permanent links follow those items, right? So if you ever change up links, you have that one, it's still associated with that link. I have had issues in the past where we had to completely change every single link associated with all digital objects in our ArchiveSpace instance because we didn't have a handle server and we had not used those links. So we did change to that, but we had to identify all the collections that had digital objects and then set up like a project to change all those links. Fun times. Don't do that to yourself if you can handle it. So you add the URI here. Again, there's a publish feature in there, and that's all that's required here. You could be done if you wanted to be. But you may want to know what is this file, like the use statement refers to what is this file being used for. Is it the image master? Is it image service, meaning it's the access copy? Or is it edited and it's also the master? Is it just a thumbnail? So this is image service. So you can choose that for various types of digital materials. So audio, video, text, all of that. You have options. And then Xlink attribute. So Xlink actuate attribute is a non-configurable control value list. This attribute is used during export to indicate how the digital object should display in the context of an EAD document. It also indicates how it will display when you are in the public user interface. It is used in conjunction with the Xlink show attribute. And that attribute is used for export for indicating how the target of a link should be displayed in the context of an EAD document. So whether it will be in the same browser window or a new window. So you use these two in conjunction, and if you don't choose them, there's just a default of icon that links out on the public side kind of thing. And default in like EAD. So we can say that this is on load. So when they go to page, it appears, and when they click on it, it will go to a new one. If you wanted the thumbnail to show, you would say embed, or you would make this representative. And then you can choose to do a file format name. This is a list as well. This is configurable. So this like spells out all the different file types, that general file type. So rather than PDF, it says portable document format. If you think that's confusing, you can edit these just to say like the abbreviations of the file formats that you see when you're looking at files in your file explorer. You can do that. This just lays it out. So this is a JPEG. You can choose a file format version. Is it a JPEG 2000? Is it TIFF? That kind of thing. You can do that. And then you can give it size. So how many bytes is it? Is it 4 gigabytes, 5 megabytes, that kind of thing? You can list that here. If you run checksums on your digital files, your digital materials, you can add the checksum here. It's unique for each file. And then you can also choose the method that you've used. You can add more methods to this if yours is not there. And then this gives a caption to it that can display also on the public side and goes along with it when it's like exported. So when you are done with that, that's the only like unique sub-record to a digital object. Besides the stuff in basic information. After that, it's just similar subject records, not subject records, sub-records to like accession records, resource records, that kind of thing. So you have languages, dates, so we could add the date from here. So it's the 1960s, so we could do that. And we could say circa 1960s, no, not 3, and say it's inclusive. We can add begin and end dates if we would like. We can also add extent if you want to add extent to for the size of it. You could also here you could add the size. If you have multiple file versions, like because you can add as many as you need to this. So if you have the master service access copy and the thumbnail, and they're all various sizes, you can indicate the full size of all of them in extent if you would like. You can add classifications, agents, subjects, notes. So there's various note types that you can have associated with digital objects. And it's not the full list, but there's very similar to resource record. And then you can do rights. So if you know the copyright associated with this photograph, you can do that here. Same with the metadata. And then you have collection management and user defined. So we're going to save this. And now you see that we've created a simple digital object. We can choose to publish all. Again, you can add events. You can merge this with another digital object, transfer it, assess it, export mods, METs, and Dublin core information on it. So get that those files to import elsewhere, especially if you're using a different like public user interface. You want to export that information. Once you've created this, you can link it. So if we go into a resource record, just add this to Krispy Kreme. If you go into a resource record, and if you go into an accession record, you can add a digital object. So we can edit this one. Yeah. We can choose, I just have, this is created from a previous training. You can go into instances, and rather than container instance, this is a digital instance of this, a digital object. You can choose to browse or create. So if you create from here, you get the same fields, but once you've saved it, you're just linking it. You can't create a complex digital object when you create in a like a resource or accession record. You're just creating a simple one. If you want a complex, you can create this here, but then you have to go out and find that record and then add to it. So that's to be aware of if you're creating in here. You can type ahead here. If you know the identifier, since we copied here, I'm just going to copy it from here. If you know identifier, title, anything, you can actually paste that in here. Sorry. And it should pull up the exact digital object that you're looking for, and you can just link it. And you can have multiple links to the same file, folder, series, especially if you do things at a folder level rather than item level. So there's multiple photographs in a folder. You can also browse and search for it, filter by text, go through the list, filter by different options like creator, subject, language, the type of digital object, even the level, like the VRA core level, you can do that. So we have this one and we link, and then you just save it and it's now linked to it. So if we go back into creating digital objects, we're going to create a basic one for the Georgia State University Signal, which is a student publication, like a student newspaper at Georgia State University. We're going to call it the Georgia State University Signal. signal, give an identifier. We'll just give it that identifier that's associated with the whole thing here. As you can see, this has multiple pages, and it would make a great complex digital object because of it being multiple pages and each page being represented in our digital collection. So we're going to not add a file version to this because we have files for each one, but you could add more descriptive information such as languages and dates if you would like. We're going to save it. And then here we saved it, but you can see up here that you now have similar buttons as resource records. We have add child and then rapid data entry. So you can do rapid data entry for digital objects. When you click add child, you get a record that's called digital component object component record. It's not so it's similar to archival object, but there's component in there to make you aware that this is a component of the parent digital object. So what's required here is either a label or a title. So we'll add a label. This is page 1. And then you can add an identifier, especially if they're different from the identifier that's for the whole thing. You add a file version. This link here links to the first page, and then we have different links for each of the other ones. And then you can fill this out to show it and all of that. And then we just click save. If you click +1, you get a new digital object component record while also saving this one. But the new one will be at the same level as this one, so it will be a sibling. If you want child for that one, you would add child, and that would be creating another hierarchy. Say it's an image that's associated with this page of the newspaper. You have that scanned, and you want to make sure that's noted. So that's a child of this parent page. Or if you're adding a page 2, you just keep adding them to that. Again, you can do rapid data entry. You can do bulk import for digital objects to associate them with archival objects, but you can't bulk import complex digital objects. So be aware of that. If you're wanting to create all your born digital collections in digital objects, be aware that they do not export EAD just from digital objects, and you cannot generate PDFs from digital objects unless you need to link them to an archival object, a resource record, a accession record, well, a resource record to generate the PDF and indicate that that digital object is associated with that collection. So be aware of that. Now let's go to the public side. So I can briefly show you a digital object and then we'll be done. So here's one that was created recently. Here we have a thumbnail associated with this. And this is the information you would see when you are viewing digital objects. So we have this thumbnail. We also have a different file version, the service file. And then you see the linked records. So we know this is Krispy Kreme records, photograph, retail shops and plants, and Alabama retail shops. If we were to go to this, we would see it as a thumbnail in this, as well as the other linked objects, and then see the information on the digital material. So this actually has 2, and if you're in an archival object and it has 2, you would see those linked in the archival object record on the public side. And that's a lot. I'm a little over on time, but please let me know if you have any questions on digital objects. There is a more in-depth digital objects training that was done at the the membership forum. So there should be a recording online, but there is definitely other digital objects recordings online in the YouTube channel. Yes, thank you, Rachel, for sharing the 2023 digital object training. So, any questions on this or any other anything else we talked about? Resource records, accession records, functional overview of the staff side. We'll give it another minute. Rachel, and then we can call it a day.
That sounds good.
So please get your questions in. But this recording will be made available, and you can also email ArchivesSpace@lyrasis.org with questions pertaining your particular instance of ArchiveSpace.
And if anyone is still having issues with the links to the agenda or the quick start guide, send an email to the email that Brittany just mentioned. We can drop it in the chat too.
It's in the chat, so feel free to email that about your specific instance or the Google Drive. But with that, we're going to let you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for attending this training, and have a wonderful day.